I look at the world through the lens of a social scientist focused on global risk, and that basically means identifying the threats to stability. So I just thought I would share a few assessments, predictions about where we're headed given COVID-19, which I hope will make people more able to understand the sensitivities around the current situation and to be more agile and make appropriate decisions. So first of all, I want to suggest that geopolitically, the coronavirus has reminded us that the traditional US-led multilateral world order is over for the moment.
Right.
I think we can all agree that we've been speculating in the last decade who's in charge of the world. Is it US? Is it China? Is it the competition between the two superpowers? We're going to keep speculating about this and scratching our heads and wondering who's in charge of the world. But I think the US, it's clear that the pandemic has shown us that we don't have global leadership in the way that we've had in previous decades. Yes, the G20, G7 met to discuss a unified response to the pandemic, but a global response is clearly lacking. And I think what's interesting to observe is that we've witnessed a unique form of COVID-19 bilateralism that's trying to fill the leadership void. So you have countries like China, countries like Turkey, Cuba, connecting with other countries through COVID-19 diplomacy, sending medical supplies, sending other related medical support. And I think it'll be interesting to observe how these bilateral alliances that have emerged during this COVID-19 pandemic, how they will reshape our world order in the coming decade, in fact. It's also interesting to observe the emergence of certain billionaires who have directly offered support to certain governments, people like Jack Ma, Adrian Chang, Bill Gates, the usual suspects perhaps. But what that will mean for the changing nature of power in this coming decade, this relationship between non-state actors and state actors through the guise of COVID-19 bilateralism. And how will that reshape our world order, our understanding of power? Of course, we know that vaccine nationalism could also reshape our world order, this competition for the vaccine, or if one country suddenly develops the vaccine and offers it to the world, that would certainly redefine who's in charge. But I think that the uncertainty is there, and I think we need to keep track of how these different actors are interacting and what that will mean for reshaping our world order. Secondly, I want to quickly say that politically, COVID-19 has given most governments a chance to gain more legitimacy in the eyes of their citizens. I don't know about you, but for me, being in London the last few months, but also having a base in New York, I was hanging on the word of President Trump and Prime Minister Johnson, hoping, when watching their press conferences, hoping that they would just figure it out. And obviously, as time has gone on, I think many of us have felt our governments globally have fallen short. And that's why we've seen bursts of anti-government protests against the lockdown measures, protests about whether the governments have done enough for us. And if you reflect on the last decade, in fact, we were already faced with this crisis of political legitimacy. In fact, 2019 was perhaps the year of the protester, where there seems to be this recurring dissatisfaction that maybe there is a better way to govern, maybe there's a better political system ahead of us. And in terms of COVID-19, it's just exacerbated that, and we're going to continue to see these anti-government protests emerge. Could we perhaps think in the coming decade about a new social contract? Will that help us navigate this relationship we have with our governments? Something to think about. Thirdly, economically, we all know the recession is here, it's coming, or it could lead to a depression. We've had a brief period where governments have had an opportunity again to regain legitimacy through their relief packages. But I think as time goes on, we will see that many citizens will feel left behind in a post-pandemic economy, and we'll see more precariats. These are people who are who feel left behind, who don't have an occupational identity. They're jumping from one temporary job to another. Right. And I think sadly, we'll see more of that, because as we know, logically, not all jobs will return after the pandemic. We don't even know when this will end. And even in this coming decade, we were already heading for a significant amount of unemployment because of automation. 40% of jobs allegedly are going to be gone in the next 15 years. So I think there's more anti-government sentiment ahead, I'm afraid. And lastly, socially, I think we can agree that for a brief period, it felt as though we were united. We were united around being against the virus, and we had this shared goal: we all want to live. And I think that was obviously positive. But as time has gone on, we've seen that there's been a lot of negative sentiment. The hate has returned. There's been recurring East Asian backlash in some parts of the world because of the perceived origins of the virus, and other such examples of hate that existed in the previous decade. It's still there, the xenophobia, etc. So I think we may need to really reflect on who we are in our individual countries. Are we globalists? Are we nationalists? Do we care about the other? COVID-19 has exacerbated that tension that has existed for the last decade. And as I discuss in my book, Future World Order, and the upcoming sequel, The COVID-19 Effect, it's going to come up more. And by the way, the proceeds from the upcoming sequel, The COVID-19 Effect, 50% of profits will go to the WHO, because we're all in this together. So hopefully, my small contribution. But anyway, that's how I view the world, a world of global risk that's been exacerbated by COVID-19. And I think we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Fantastic. Really spoken with a view at the very top, as a bright analyst that you are, right?